Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me is one of the foot knights of Gallia from Highland Miniatures. And this is a 3D print. It's come off of my Mars 3 and I'll pop a link to the STL so you can get them if you do want to print these at home. And I believe Highland Miniatures also has printed versions that you can pick up through Only Games, which work with my Mini Factory. Now what I've decided, of course, is red and black because that seems to be the look for some of the new Bretonnian miniatures that are coming along, and a fair few of you have asked me how I would tackle this. It's nice and simple. It looks like there's a lot of detail on these miniatures when really there isn't. So we're kind of cheating with some of it, and you'll see what I mean as we go along. The recipe for the base of this one and all of the paints will be listed in the description below, so let's get started. So in front of me I've got my foot knight, and I want to give you a quick note on why I've attached the shield before painting. Now ordinarily it would be easier if you were to blue tack the shield or something to something separate, maybe a cocktail stick or whatever, so that you can prime and paint that separately and then glue it onto the miniature once both are finished. But if you're anything like me, you'll probably end up assembling some of these miniatures, pushing them around a table for a little while, and gluing the shields on. It is eminently possible to paint these things with the shield attached. Most miniatures which will have a shield on them, you can find ways in behind them without having to worry too much about what you're going to hit. I just wanted to attach this shield to show you that it's possible. Now once I've assembled it, I have primed the miniature. I've used here grey from the Vallejo rattle cans. Any medium grey will work perfectly well. Something lighter will be better. That's why I've used this light grey. So grey sear or ash grey from the Army Painter will work quite well. You could use Mechanica standard grey, but it might be a little dark. One for you to try if that's what you've got access to. I want a grey because most of this is going to be fairly medium to light colours, with the exception of course of the black gear. Now on most miniatures I would suggest start from the face, the gloves and so forth, start from the lowest layer and start painting up. But with something wearing this much armour, we're going to change things up a little bit because it will be easier to lay down the main armour colour first, apply other stuff around it, make a bit of a mess and then tidy up. So what I've got, this is plate mail metal from the Army Painter. This is one of the new Fanatic ones and it just goes on so nicely. You could use Iron Hand steel. I would probably go for a lighter, something lighter than lead belcher because, you know, these are supposed to be bright, shiny heroes, unless you want to go the grimdark route, and then, yeah, go darker. Now, ironically, these Highlands miniatures are a little bit more detailed, well, not detailed, I suppose, but they are different to the foot knights of Bretonnia in that they've got sleeves and such like that. So obviously your miniature might be a little bit different once you've got it in front of you, but whatever the case, just slap on a nice coat of plate mail. Now that won't take very long to do, and over a grey primer you'll find one coat of most metallic paints will do you fine, but anywhere that you get a bit of streaking you can come back and give it a second when you need to. Now go on to the face, and here I have Cadian Flesh Tone. It's a little bit lighter than I would normally base coat my skin, but hopefully by the end of this you'll see what I'm up to. This will still take a couple of coats. It'll cover pretty well. Again, this is the reason why we've used quite a light primer, but we really want a solid colour on the face. So there's one, and I'll give that a second once it dries. Now if you're planning on halving or even quartering the clothing on your knights, generally picking two colours. You want the second colour of these that you apply to be the one with the better coverage. So I'm going to start first of all with Mephiston Red here, and then over the top of that I'm going to apply the black colour instead. So I'm going to apply a little bit of red. Oh, I should have done a leather underneath there, never mind. Let's blast some red on this part. If there's not a clear cut in the clothing, just go over a little bit with your red, so that when it comes time to apply the second colour, you can decide where that is going to go. So a couple of coats of Mephiston Red. And like I mentioned on this particular miniature, she's got these sleeves. So I'm going to halve the tabard I'm going to get in there behind there with a little bit of trickery. You see, I'm not worried if I hit the gloves and what have you, because we've yet to paint those. And then I'm going to do the sleeves in opposite colors. Now with a couple of coats to get a nice solid red, you'll see what I mean particularly on the shield about just go over the bits that you're going to cover in black later. Now I have gone slightly out of sequence and I've realized that only now. So what I have, we're going to go back and paint in some of the leather details. This is oak brown from the Army Painter, but very similar to this would be either dryad bark or rhinox hide. What I'm going to do is a quick coat of this just to paint in any leather straps. And there's a little bit of armor tucked under here, which as you see I should have done first before painting the red. Ooh, whoopsie doodle. We'll get up around here around the gorget and the straps on the helmet. Won't take much. Okay, now having done that in the right order, what I've got next, this is black grey from Vallejo. Now you could use Corvus black here, but I just want to show you very quickly on the sleeve here. The coverage on this is astonishingly good. So this is why I tend to recommend either pick this up or German grey. Black grey is a little bit more neutral, where German grey has a tiny tint of blue to it. Let's get behind that shield. See, easy as that. I really like the Vallejo, the black range that they have. So I do thoroughly recommend, if you're going to be painting something where you want to try and minimize the number of brush strokes you're making, or you don't want to have to come back and do 2 or 3 coats, there we go, look at that, black grey. So at this point, now I can start looking where my clothing, okay, straight line up there, and the belt buckle is going to help me to size this up. I'll just carefully pop a little bit of that in place. Same there. And your clothing, like especially on these funky bits up around the top, they don't need to be perfectly straight. You just want to make sure that it's visibly halved. So, once I've done that, let's come back in a couple of seconds. All right, now we're starting to get somewhere. Particularly around the back, don't worry too much if there isn't a physical, visible seam in the clothing. At this sort of scale, it's not going to matter too much. And what I'm mixing up, just a tiny wee bit of water into some black. Ordinarily, I don't like to use pure blacks because it looks a little unrealistic. But in this case, I want a really deep lacquered black finish to certain things. So I'm going to paint in his scabbard for his dagger with a little bit of black. As well, you'll see I've popped a line down the center of the, well, as close to center as I could get, I should say, over his shield. What I'm going to do now is use the black to fill that in. So starting by going to the edge where I know I'm not going to make a mess, and then gradually coming up closer to that line. So I'm starting upside down because it gives me a little more control as I get to the tip there. Then flip it the other way around, and with a bit of luck I can repeat that success and get a straight line. If I can't, oh well, I've still got plenty of red paint. Now that is really most of the hard work done. I have gone back and tied it up with a little bit of oak brown, the leather details that I splashed while I was putting on the black, but that's seconds worth of work. I do recommend if you're painting a unit of these guys, or 3 or 4 at a time, leave some of these tidy up stages until you've got a few that need it doing. Now what I've got is some Ushabti bone. What I'm going to paint in is the cord here, holding on this little fleur-de-lis, and also this little satchel pouch baggy thingy back here. A couple of thin coats of this will do the job just fine. Now I'm not sure if the official miniatures have these little half capes on them, but I'm going to apply a couple of coats of pallid witch flesh because I want a very light, just off-white color back here. Now for the wooden grip on a weapon, what I'm going to use is XV88. Let's flip her around to get this side of the hand. And I'm also going to use this to base coat her hair. And now with some Retributor armor, just a few little details here and there. I wouldn't add very much of this if you can help it. The temptation will be to go overboard. And now at last, back to plate mail metal to do any of that tidy up that you need to. So any little odd splashes or bits that you just painted over as you were working earlier, go ahead with that now. Now while that dries, I'm going to mix up my shade. Ordinarily, you could just use Agrax Earthshade from the pot, but it's a little dark for what I've got in mind, I would suggest. So what I'd like to do is to decant a little bit of shades and some Lamian medium into these little dropper bottles. You can pick them up online, really cheap, and it's great for being able to accurately measure out mixes and ratios and stuff like that. Now I'm going to do just half and half of each, so it's quite simple, but grab yourself some bottles. It makes life so much easier. Now once you've got that all combined, it's time to apply it to the miniature. And you can be quite generous with this. It's going to settle fairly naturally where you need it to, but any big clumps, like on the shoulder here for example, I don't want that much in one spot. So I will drag some of that away with my brush. Quite commonly I get the question, oh, how come yours settle so much better than mine? Well, because once I've applied it, I will spend a couple of seconds just making sure it goes where I want it to. Shades, they're not a one and done. You do have to give them a little bit of attention. But once you do, life is so much easier. So over the entire miniature, then we will give this about half an hour to dry. See what we've got then. Now that's going to make quite a difference, but we get all of our shading, it tones down some of the colors a bit, and introduces a fair bit of depth. And we're really only going to do a couple of highlights here. I'm going to start with Brain Matter Beige from the Army Painter. Now this, if you wanted to, you could mix in a little bit of white into the Pallid Witch Flesh from earlier, but I really like Brain Matter Beige. It is a wonderful just off-white, and just perfect for a few quick stripes on her cape here. As well, I've also used that to tidy up and brighten up the rope holding on the little icon on her chest there. I'll move on to Mournfang Brown, and I'm going to use this just to paint little bits of the leather. And this will be a little bit easier for you to see in person because the shine that the Agrax Earthshade will leave behind isn't quite as pronounced in person. But the camera picks it up like nobody's business, so I swear you'll see this more easily. Now for this stage I would use Wild Rider Red, but my Wild Rider Red has run out, so what I've done is mixed up half and half Evil Sun Scarlet and Fire Dragon Bright, which is pretty close. I would really suggest, just use Wild Rider Red if you've got it, but that's not going to look too bad for a bodge job. Now that's going to look a little more impressive once this is varnished. I'm going to move on to Skaven Blight Dinge, and we're going to do the same thing on the black cloth. So just little lines here and there to help accentuate the shape of the clothing. Now for his skin, I'm going to paint over most of it again with Kislev Flesh. This is a little tricky to do on camera, but all you want to do is leave just a little bit of the shaded Cadian flesh tone in the recesses so that you're defining really here the shape of her face. Now because we've used Agrax Earthshade over that Cadian flesh tone to begin with, her skin's going to be quite brown and a little bit lifeless. So after doing that first highlight, what I'm going to do is actually go back with another shade. I've got here Reikland Flesh Shade, and I've just put a couple of dots of water into it to thin it down roughly 50-50. Then just a little bit of this over the face. Add a little bit of warmth and life to the skin, and if you have splodged into any recesses that you didn't want to paint into, that'll now tidy that up. Okie dokie. Now once that's finished drying, you can grab yourself some Flayed One Flesh, and now we're going to add in those final highlights just to give her face a little bit of definition at a distance. So along the center of her nose, cheekbones and chin are your prime candidates, especially on miniatures that are really only just showing a tiny wee part of their face. I tell you, I keep finding miniatures which have got their faces obscured. It's really hard to show you what they look like. I've watered down some Carroburg Crimson, same thing again, Just a tiny wee dot of water in there, and I'm just going to blob a little bit of this across her bottom lip. Now I actually managed to score half of her face while cleaning her up, so that's not going to look quite right, but it's a little bit of extra life there. Now, quite forgetting I was supposed to record it, I did a little bit of Ungor flesh just on the tips of her hair. Now what I'm going to do is to highlight the metal, and for this I'm using steel. This is a Vallejo Model Air color. Stormhost Silver is very similar to it. What I'm going to do is just get a little bit of this and use the edge of my brush rather than the point in most places just to ding up and make some of these bits a little shinier. You can do as much or as little of this as you like. I would recommend a few little high impact spots are going to look better than completely making everything gleam, but it is up to you. Okay, now the last thing to do at this stage is to varnish her, but before I do that I'm going to apply a decal to her shield here. I'm not going to do that on screen because it's a big flat shield. It's nice and easy to apply a water slide transfer. Once that has settled and dried properly, I'll then varnish her with a matte. I always use Instar's Matte Varnish Plus. Let's get a look at what she looks like when she is all finished. And there we have it at last. Our foot knight is complete. Now obviously I've shown you here with the red and black, but the same basic method will work for pretty much any color scheme that you want to use. The same basic advice holds true though. Whichever color you're going to lay down first, put a couple of layers of the one that doesn't cover quite as well, and then the superior coverage to the other half. It'll make it much easier. As well, the little short cape that she's got on her back there, I've chosen a white-ish color to go with the icons that are going to be on the shields and what have you. You can pick whatever you fancy. Knights ordinarily are pretty individual. A uniform like this looks pretty cool. It just requires a little bit of fudging, I think, to get an interesting unit where some of them are going to be quartered, some halved, whatever is going to make them stand out a bit from one another while still being a cohesive unit. Anyhow, as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and importantly, resin, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much, folks. Without your support, this would not happen. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.